During my father's burial, when the priest was praying over his coffin, the family attorney leaned in and said something that my sister and I could overhear. Your mother gets nothing from your father's $75 million estate. My pulse is the only sound from that day that I can still clearly hear. The cash wasn't the issue. It was the manner in which the whole world changed in that second. Greetings, I am Nathan Carter. The year is 31, building designer. My bro, young man. Plus, I had always assumed I knew who my dad was until that very second. Richard Carter was a guy who had always kept to himself and took his time. Arose well before dawn. When it squeaked, he fixed the porch himself. Direct payment. Chauffeured a rusty Ford pickup that was far beyond its prime. Using his own hands, he constructed our house. Although he was reticent to speak, his words had an enduring impact. I felt like everything was spinning out of control when I heard $75,000. My mother, Margaret, had a nice expression on her face as she stared at me in despair. She was unaware. I had a feeling. What about my sister Elena? She seems unfazed. She seemed remarkably unfazed by the situation, as if this were completely old news to her. I was gasping for air. To be clear, we were never the kind of family to broach the subject of finances. Dad was really thrifty. From the construction company he had secretly held for decades, I would have guessed that he had a small nest egg. What about millions? Is it more than one? It seemed like another world. Plus the will, the dreaded will. It did more than tremble us. It set off an explosion. My dad left almost everything to Elena and me. Not a word about Mom, not even about the home they shared for 30 years. I wished I could convince myself it was an error. Just a typo. A preliminary version. Something that must be signed. One that may be turned back. Yet such was not the case. I could feel it. Put my name here. I was there. Notarized documents. My father's death became less tragic. In that one instant transformed into an enigma. Quite risky. The truths it revealed would affect everyone, including those closest to the subject. There was an overwhelming sense of weight in the home the night after the funeral. My mom, Margaret, my sister Elena, and I were all sitting in the living room. On Sunday mornings, Dad would polish the floor while the fireplace crackled softly, throwing long shadows over the surface. Yet it failed to provide any heat. I could hardly stand the stillness. After much hesitation, Mom eventually said it, not yelling, but whispering with a hint of treachery in her voice. To what extent did he leave me nothing? Slowly I nodded. Incredulous, she blinked. Apart from the home, my mom, no. Everything is in our names. Despite everything, she remained composed. Not immediately. Rather, she reclined as if her back had suddenly snapped. She proceeded to laugh. Once only. A fragile, lifeless chuckle that failed to meet her gaze. I supported him through his debt litigation and quiet periods when he hardly spoke, and now he simply erases me. I was married to that guy for 30 years and I reared his children. It was the first time I recognized my mom as someone abruptly cut off from her own life, rather than the serene, mild-mannered woman who baked biscuits and sang a cappella in the kitchen. Elena, on the other hand, utterly remained silent. With her arms crossed and her mouth tightened, she just looked at the fire, as if bracing herself for a storm they had already anticipated. Was it a secret? My mother had already left the room when I softly questioned her. Her hesitant turn toward me was a clue. Excuse me, regarding the will, those funds, anything at all. She took a while to respond. She lowered her gaze. And then I'll be the focus again. It was clear to me that Dad had hidden assets, she said. Last year he accompanied me on a vacation, then on to Miami and perhaps other locations. When we were younger, Dad would never have arranged our accommodations. The things he told me were true. Concerning financial records, financial assets. On the subject of not having faith in everyone, some part of my stomach became numb. You mean to tell me that he plotted this? Shaking her head, she expressed her disapproval. Oh, no, it's my contention that he was defending something. maybe even a single individual. I just never thought he would entirely distance himself from Mom. However, the harm had already begun to manifest. I overheard my mom talking on the phone in the kitchen that night. No way, not even with a buddy. Working with an attorney. Jerome Hale, the lawyer who had deciphered the will, that was the one she was contacting. She spoke with a quivering yet determined tone. What she really wanted was a copy of the first draft, she said. The first iteration, prior to the modification. When I realized that, there was no longer any sadness. It was wartime. Our house, which Dad had constructed, seemed like disputed territory by morning. Mom seemed more oriented. She seemed resolute. Out came folders. Documents attesting to a person's birth. Marriage certificate. Files from previous years on taxes. He couldn't have gotten this much money without my knowledge, she said, as she rummaged through many documents. Unless his intention was to conceal it. She had a point. Richard Carter was unassuming and careful. The $75 million didn't appear out of nowhere. Its construction was done by him, in silence, on purpose, and it seems he concealed it. It was seen a betrayal by Mom. I refer to it as a secret. A long-lost secret that we had only just begun to reveal. Elena referred to it by a different name. Dad didn't believe on emotional decisions. She stated with a hint of anger while having breakfast. He could have felt this was cleaner, however. Safer. Legal. That in no way constitutes treachery. Do you intend to defend this? I lost my temper. I'm attempting to comprehend it. I will give it your all, Elena. Mom said, her voice quivering. The man you're attempting to comprehend has unilaterally removed me from all that we accomplished together. The subsequent hush was the type of stillness that refuses to go. The sort that dabs into furniture and dangles from walls. The letter followed. It didn't come in a return address-free flat envelope until 3 days later. Included. Duplicate of a Cayman Islands bank statement with the name of RC. The assets. There is a balance of 12.4 million, but it was missing from the estate records. The bequest was not made in the will. However, who signed the account paperwork? It belonged to my dad. Our family was rocked to its core by the revelation. For some reason, Mom thought Elena was keeping the truth from her. Elena denied it, but she did not reveal the location of their trip from last year. In an effort to defuse the situation, I positioned myself between them. That evening, Mom informed me in the hallway, I'm filing a formal contest. Money isn't the only factor here. The key is trust. I will take your father to court to show that he deceived me. I won't dispute it. No, not entirely. For the simple reason that I had lost all faith in anybody. I began perusing Dad's old PC in his study, which included his emails. An exception stuck out. No one ever sent the draft, assisting Nathan Carter. My departure will cause a... If you're reading this, then I didn't get to explain it in time. Just know what I built wasn't just for wealth. It was to protect you, all of you. Even if you don't see it yet. For what seemed like an eternity, I gazed at the television. He hadn't only departed. His unanswered inquiries might lead to the demise of our remaining unity, unless we exercise caution. We were careless as well. It took 2 weeks after the funeral for the petition to be submitted. Case of Margaret Carter v. Richard A. Carter's estate. It was now a formality. Legal. General population. Cold. For some reason, the suit I was wearing to the first hearing seemed too stiff for the guy I once was. As I sat down next to my mom, I saw the judge's expressionless scan of the motion. With her back straight and her expression inscrutable, Elena's attorney sat across from her in the courtroom. There was a heavy air of polished wood and ancient paper in the room, but what really weighed us down was the weight of our unspoken agreements. Mom claimed Dad wasn't mentally competent to sign the will, and that he was coerced into doing so. Contrary to what Elena's lawyer had said, Richard Carter was fully conscious and capable right up to the day he passed away. A continuance was ordered by the court. Our sorrow transformed into paperwork in an instant. Funds deposited. The process of discovery. as well as news articles. Our family's reputation was brought to light 3 days later. Modest builder's $75 million bequest leaves wife suing her own children. An old picture of Dad beaming alongside the frame of the home he constructed for us in '98, wearing his work boots and carrying a hammer over his shoulder, appeared with the piece. A neighbor's statement appears underneath it. There was no one on the neighborhood who was more modest than Rick. He was sitting on millions of dollars, and we had no clue. Nobody here did it. Reporters began to circle the area. There was a camera van outside the home non-stop for 2 days. A message with the words, "Just in case you want to share your side." And a microphone ended up in Mom's mailbox. Void of speech, she hurled it into the garbage. Leaks, however, were far worse than the press. Members of the press gained access to some of the estate papers in a matter of days. Shell businesses were located by them. Assets located in Arizona and Utah. The RAC Enterprises offshore trust accounts are associated with the Colorado real estate investment business. New information kept piling on, and we weren't sure how to put out the fire. More and more, Mom grew adamant. Words like bitter widow and disgruntled wife in the headlines only served to hone her determination. What about Elena? She persisted in separating from him. Someone texted her, "Are you in good form?" For 1 whole day she remained silent. And lastly, just what is okay, hidden from the press and attorneys we met up. Fatigue had set in. Pale, residing under the burden of an unspoken statement. "I had no idea about the properties," she said, agitating her coffee without really drinking it. However, it was clear to me that he had some plans. On one side, I stooped. "Elena, what are you planning?" For the first time since everything began, I saw dread in her eyes as she glanced in my direction. People didn't trust Dad. Yes, not even Mom. Screaming was on my mind. My only action was to inquire. "What?" Elena gulped violently. "He said that she would sometimes check his mail. Check his messages." To clarify whatever she didn't get, just ask her questions. Averting my gaze, I ducked. "Do you really think she was concerned? She desired control, you know. That rested between us like a live bullet." At home, Mom was getting ready for round 2. The forensic accountants she engaged were looking into it thoroughly, more thoroughly than I had anticipated. At that point, Travis Monroe was located, his father's previous business associate. This individual was completely unknown to us until he was linked to a Nevada contracting firm that went bankrupt due to allegations of tax evasion and money laundering. Although there were some similarities, there was no concrete evidence connecting Dad to any wrongdoing. Legal documents, funds sent by wire, interacted on a date 3 years before. It was that Mom used. His secret was obvious to him. I was excluded because of it. He believed that if I were to be written in, I would reveal everything. When the following court date rolled around, the tensions flared up. Mom said Elena was collaborating, while Elena called Mom paranoid. And so it went. Where am I then? I did nothing as I stood there. News outlets descended onto the courtroom after the proceedings. "Do you think someone changed the will? Do you know where your sister is keeping her money? How much did your father truly cost?" "No," I said, "just couldn't." I sat at Dad's old office that night. The chair's squeak remained unchanged. There was still a strong cedar aroma. However, the guy who had previously lived here, he was no longer a part of my life. He had bequeathed more than just a tidy sum. He had dropped a minefield. The influx of emails persisted. Thread alternate trustee said that he had contemplated appointing a third party outside the family as agent, a San Diego financial counselor by the name of Stephen Lorne. The offshore account seemed to have been set up with his assistance. He was hauled in for deposition by his mother. He seemed at ease, slick, someone who could grin while hiding secrets behind stacks of paperwork. His response was incisive when questioned about Margaret's exclusion from the estate. "Dear Mr." As far as Carter was concerned, his wife lacked the temperament necessary to handle intricate financial matters. I was afraid Margaret might crack her own fingers from the tight grip she had on her hands. My phone was constantly ringing throughout the weeks that followed. Someone from high school wanted to catch up all of a sudden. Donations were requested in honor of your father's legacy via handwritten letters delivered by charities. One even went so far as to provide a pre-engraved plaque. I felt nauseous. There was no longer any sadness. A sight to see. Elena pretended to be impartial, but her silence betrayed her true feelings. Oh, and Mom, she was totally changing. She lost her once defining warmth and became as cold as steel. She made statements like, I will get justice even if it means destroying this entire place. And to be completely candid, I came to trust her. The most unfortunate event, however, occurred when a local newscaster appeared at the courts armed with an unsigned duplicate of the second will, one that included Margaret Carter as a co-beneficiary. The one who dumped her was 6 months prior to this one. It was genuine ink. Was it the signature? Almost the same, but not quite. Nothing came up in the forensics. The court said it couldn't be used. Still, even a shred of uncertainty was enough to reawaken scars that not even a judge could heal. A domino effect occurred. Following an altercation over Dad's old safe, Mom took legal action by restraining Elena. Elena abandoned the town. I stopped returning phone calls completely. I used to believe that being sad would be the hardest thing about losing my dad. There was an error on my part. Worst thing was coming to terms with the fact that I'd never really knew him, and that whatever mark he made in the world, money wasn't there. It was debris, as ChatGPT put it. It was a jam-packed courtroom, with their cameras concealed, but their gaze-fixed reporters queued up around the rear wall. Sitting rigidly along the benches, acquaintances of the family avoided eye contact. That morning, even the judge seemed weighted, as if he sensed that the impending proceedings were about more than simply another estate dispute. They hinted at something more profound. The messier man. All of us were once again dressed in all black, for battle, not for funerals. First to the stand was Margaret Carter, who happens to be my mother. Stiffening her back and gripping a tissue that she hadn't used yet, she strode ahead, her heels resonating on the shiny floor. And she swore, sat, looked straight forward. Her position as a mother, wife, and partner in Richard Carter's life, as well as her memories and marriage, were the first subjects of the gentle interrogation. A decent chap, she said. Dependable, quiet. We avoided discussing money like the plague, but I always assumed it was just his style. Leaning closer, the lawyer said, "Were his financial records ever made available to you by him?" "No." "Are you inquiring?" "Only once. At most, I'd say twice." He reassured me, "You don't need to worry about that stuff, Mags." Therefore, I chose not to. She hesitated. There was a little dip in her voice. Once upon a time, I really wanted to have. A sense of calm pervaded the chamber. Every chair squeaked and groaned. "Were you aware of the offshore accounts?" "Oh no." Neither the Utah properties, nor the fact that he retained any ownership interest in Monroe development were even on my radar. It was a reporter who told me. "How did that affect you emotionally?" Mom first remained silent. She fought back a tear as she continued, as if time had erased me. Her gaze landed on the judge. "Your Honor, I really cared about my spouse. I just can't believe a guy who said he would marry me and have a family would die without ever answering my questions." I was gasping for air as she descended. After that, Elena was contacted. She seemed composed, just as before. She looked much older than 27 years old, in her navy blue suit and with her hair pulled back in a tidy bun. Her once reassuring self-assurance now seemed more like armor as she made her way to the witness stand. She opened gradually with her attorney. "Have you ever heard your dad worry that your mom won't be able to manage big checks?" "Elena," she paused. She answered, "Yes," at last. It wasn't that he didn't think she was smart, however. She freaked out, he said. That she acted irrationally when rational thought was required. And what was his desire? He yearned for a steady hand. All people. Protecting people, he added, sometimes meant excluding them. Perched across the room, I saw the face of my mother crumble. Her jaw clenched, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. No flinching from Elena, a more determined prosecutor, advanced to the stand. "Did you know that your father had interests abroad?" "Elena, I knew he was spreading his investments around. Is it true that he instructed you not to tell your mom about it?" Moment of silence. "Yes." Everyone in the room let out a gasp. Leaning closer, the attorney said, "Are you of the opinion that your father modified the will when he was mentally competent?" The answer is yes. "Is he loved your mom, in your opinion?" Elena briefly shut her eyes. Even though it hurt, I think he believed he was doing the right thing. For the second time, nobody spoke. Afterwards, the judge summoned me. Not a single item had been planned. My intention was not to provide a testimony. However, you do not remain silent when your name is spoken into a microphone in the presence of your enraged relatives. I swore at the altar. "Lie down." The perspiration on my knuckles had begun. "Dear Mr. Tell me about your dad, Carter." Slowly the words slipped out. "He was exacting, private, nice but difficult to pin down. He was my driving instructor. Methods for repairing a fence. How am I ever going to be ready for this? Have you and your dad ever discussed his estate plans?" "No." "Were you aware of the accounts? Those shell businesses?" "What about the homes?" "No." Before proceeding, I glanced at my sister and mom. However, I am aware that his motivation was not retribution. I guess he thought he was fixing something that needed fixing, but that we hadn't noticed was broken. It was clear that the attorney was not pleased. "Do you mean broken? We rely on it. Our mutual comprehension. He probably didn't mean for us to quarrel over his possessions. I believe he was hoping that we might find a way to celebrate it as a team." After that, I took a break. Then on top of that, he was obviously wrong if that was his intention. If anything further needed to be said, the judge inquired. I took my hand out of my pocket, a sheet of folded paper. I carefully unfurled it. This was in his toolkit, I discovered. "Just in case," was the label he put on the Ziploc bag he left behind. I'm aware it doesn't have any legal weight. Still, it might convey more than the will ever could, so I read it out loud. "Nathan, I assume you're furious since you're here reading this. It's okay. There were times when I erred. Since I was unable to articulate my needs verbally, I often made choices in private. My creation wasn't made with ego in mind. Alternatively, authority. So you could live lighter than I did. It was to offer you and Elena something substantial. Because my love for your mother waned, I made sure to include her. I didn't want to risk losing her while I was still alive, so I left her out of it. I was worried she would resist my wishes. I ended up losing her nevertheless. Money shouldn't be your defining factor. Allow the truth to mold you. Warm regards. Dad," I said. The judge remained silent. No judge can do it. However, the atmosphere changed. Over everyone's heads, a hush descended like fog. "Yes," the lawyer agreed. "There are no more inquiries." I got off the stool. There was a noticeable thinness to the air. Cameras continued to flare outside, but on the inside, after much teasing, a secret was ultimately revealed. For the first time since everything started, my feelings of longing extended beyond my father. I hated him, unfit for death, but you did it by leaving us with a riddle that lacked a clear answer. A legacy that faced us with a choice loyalty or truth evidence or faith. We were consistently falling short of that option. A guy who didn't belong in the courtroom quietly appeared 2 days after the hearing, just when we believed the chamber had shown every potential crack. He stood at an average height, had gray hair on the sides of his face, and wore a plain blue suit with wire-rimmed spectacles. He remained silent as he sat in the very back row of the hearing room. Our family attorney, Mr. Hale, was presented with an envelope by the judge after the court had recessed for the day. In his opinion, the man's time had come. Rick would have preferred it told correctly. In the very foyer of the courtroom, Mr. Hale opened the package. My gut churned at the sight of the 6 written papers thumb drive and the horrifying business card that were inside. Monroe Travis previously co-founded the contracting firm Carter and Monroe. A name that had only ever been murmured in court records up to that point in time had never been spoken aloud. A squint formed in Mr. Hale's eye. "Would you want to go on record, please?" A nod from Monroe indicated agreement. "That much is due to him. Me, Mom." Elena and our separate attorneys met that evening in Hale's office. No news outlets. Down with court recorders. All we had was a secure room and the impending revelation, like a man about to confess in church. Monroe perched on the edge of his chair, clutching his hat with both hands. "I began our journey in 1994, he started. We were both struggling construction workers, coordinated on a goal, launched a business, presented by Carter and Monroe. The plan all along was for it to be 50-50. A downward glance escaped him. However, as time went on, Rick desired a more sanitary option. He had issues with the way a few of our customers handled business, the transactions that need payment in full. Assurances are conveyed via the handshake, especially when investigations into some of those clients began. Mom arched an eyebrow. "Looked into, in order to clean, theft of funds, the typical grime," Mr. Monroe went on. "I was informed by Rick that he wanted to go, predicted a covert acquisition of my assets, and then vanished. Get a new business up and running under a fictitious identity so he can shield his family from legal trouble." Down the table came the thumb drive which he slipped. "These are electronics messages, legal contracts, the evidence. No, Margaret, Rick wasn't trying to keep money from you. He was trying to hide it from the Internal Revenue Service. Shady contractors and his old business partners who threatened him when he left." Elena drew nearer. "Do you want to imply that Dad was in danger?" Monroe, with weary eyes, nodded. "Danger was present. The genuine article. So he transferred some assets to a foreign country. He wanted to make sure your identities wouldn't be linked to whatever happened to him, not because he didn't trust you, but because he wanted to avoid any suspicion." A leaden stillness descended upon the chamber like a thick drape. Mum said softly as she gazed at him. "Subsequently, I wonder why he kept quiet. To put it lightly, because he didn't think you'd understand," Monroe said. "You were adored by Rick. However, he was also aware that you had a binary worldview. The gray was his home. I just caught a glimpse of Mom's wince, but she remained silent thereafter." Mr. Hale accessed the encrypted folder by opening the file on the thumb drive. Included in the contents were financial statements, agreements, notes, and a letter to Monroe that was dated 2 months before to Dad's passing. "Do not allow them to fear the worst in the event that anything were to happen." To me it read, "Just be honest. You name it. No matter the cost to the illusion I painstakingly tended to." That sentence slammed me. It was an illusion, and that was just what we had been holding to. An unassuming guy who carries about a toolbox and wears weathered boots. On Sundays he cooked burgers and avoided lengthy remarks in favor of non-specific nods. But below it all, there was another person, one who was opposed by others, retained information. We were unprepared for the shadow existence. It was clear that Mom was destroyed. Even though it had changed form, the treachery remained. Adapted new form. She wasn't meant to be. She was shielded from harm. The outcome, however, had no discernible change. She said, "I could have assisted him. Had I been there, I would have pulled him in." A nod from Monroe indicated agreement. "That is what I think, not Rick. Perhaps he let you down in that regard." Elena seems taken aback. "Why is it at this moment? Just what is the point of coming forward?" Monroe locked gazes with her. "Just because your mom was on the verge of destroying what he had worked so hard to create in an attempt to establish a falsehood. The truth, no matter how painful it may be, is always preferable to falsehood." It was Mr. Hale who sprang to his feet. "Things are different now." He had a point. Even if Monroe says that is the law, the court may not believe him. The digital trace, however, was authentic. The agreements were formalized, the cash find out. Dad wasn't only a guy of mystery. He erected a gloomy castle in the hopes that his loved ones would never notice his handiwork in defending them. And at this point, we stood among the ruins of the stronghold, determining whether we would reconstruct or set fire to the remnants. The last stratum had been unearthed, I had assumed. The confession of Travis Monroe seemed to me to be the last shadow cast on my father's secret existence. Though I was mistaken. Something I found a week after Monroe came out blew everything to smithereens once again. Something as basic as a recollection served as the catalyst. A picture that Elena had showed me a year ago sprang into my head. An expanse of shoreline, a meal on the roof, with a mojito in one hand and the sunset in the background. She smiles. It has to be Miami, I thought. On the other hand, the picture data's embedded location tag revealed a different story. Welcome to Grand Cayman's Georgetown. I didn't give it much consideration when it happened. After selling off one of his lesser firms, Elena informed me that she and Dad went on a quiet trip to help him clear his thoughts. It seemed innocuous, she said, even more lovely. Now that we knew all, that information struck us differently. I was unable to release it. I revisited the old images that she had provided via our family cloud. Observed her boarding a private charter plane. Another showing Dad standing outside the window of a meeting room with a group of strangers wearing suits. It was confirmed by the timestamps. The journey took place 2 months prior to Dad revising his will. It was hard for me to believe. I decided to inquire about it. I turned around and called out to her as I cornered her in the driveway of the house where we had spent our youth. Can you tell me what transpired in the Caymans? Her body tensed up. They stared directly at me. Why are you inquiring at this moment? Simply put, I believe you have more knowledge than what you've revealed. There must have been a purpose for Dad taking you there, and I get the impression that you've been concealing it from both Mom and me. At first, she remained silent. Afterwards, she finally spoke. He insisted that I sign paperwork. I felt queasy. Which documents are these? She lowered her gaze. She became quite quiet. Belief develops, forms of authorization. In the event that anything were to happen, he wanted a reliable individual to be named as a secondary beneficiary and executor. Every step was within the bounds of jurisdiction. However, though, he sealed my lips in secrecy. Elena, you're more than simply an observer. You're actively involved. Why remain silent? Because it had nothing to do with money, she said. The main concern was safety. With all of that, Dad didn't trust attorneys. He had doubts about you handling it. Not because he didn't care about you, he just finds you too inquisitive and slow to make up your mind. He had to do something. I handed it to him. Words failed me. Are you aware of the impression that gives off? Unfazed, she continued. Like a person who carried out her father's last desire. That was my protest. Oh no. The attitude of someone who believed she was superior to everyone else. We hadn't really checked Dad's safe until that night, so I took out a storage disk. Re-encrypted directories. The difference this time is that under the personal folder, I discovered audio files dictations he took in the months before his death. On the first one I clicked. I was pleasantly surprised by how well Elena managed the Grand Cayman account. She posed challenging inquiries, showed no fear. It worries me that Nathan will take it personally, but I believe she will keep things stable while I'm gone. Transparency, in his view, is love. In my opinion, it's a weakness. I was gasping for air. To another I skipped. Even now, Margaret checks her mail. My gut tells me she's trying to help. However, the offshore relocation is something I am unable to disclose to her. She will force me to reverse it if she finds out, and that may ruin everything. Lastly, a video clip. This is terrible. That I am unable to confide in my own wife is something I despise. But if things go wrong, I also despise the idea of her being involved in anything. No problem, Elena will get it. Hopefully Nathan will pardon me. In due time. In due time, the sound of the word was sharp. Upon my second confrontation with Elena, a Accompanied by the recordings, she failed to refute my accusations. Once the case was resolved, I was going to inform you. Mom finally gave up fighting anything after that. I just choose not to detonate anything. It was already done, I told him. You accomplished it in silence. We remained still for what seemed like an eternity. After that, she said, "Do you believe I'm the antagonist here?" I saw her, my sister, in whom I had once placed my whole faith, and I said the most truthful thing I could muster. I am at a loss for words. Chaui was the atmosphere during the subsequent court hearing. A formal examination was initiated after the disclosure of Elena's participation with Dad's accounts. She may have a conflict of interest as both a beneficiary and a secondary executor, which compounds the problem with the will. Mother's legal team launched an aggressive campaign. Elena was portrayed as an accomplice in the plot, someone who had undisclosed influence over Dad's actions, managed his money behind the scenes, and helped conceal assets for her own benefit. According to Elena's attorney, her client was following orders, that she did not get an unfair advantage, that her actions were entirely recorded and in accordance with Richard Carter's goals. However, the impression remained unaffected. It was gorged by the press. Did Elena Carter have control over the Carter fortune? Prior to her father's demise, a shadowy daughter investigates. Her public appearances came to a halt, deleted all of her social media accounts, transmitted to a new county with a rental property. What about our bond? I am gasping for air. We were really open with each other. There was now complete quiet between us. Knowing she acted loyally was the toughest, the most excruciating aspect, rather than avarice. No ill will. I mean, come on. Firm belief. In her mind, she was acting morally. Perhaps in her own perverse way she was. The concealment of the truth from us. However, she did more than save her father's legacy. We were meant to construct one together, and she ruined it. On a wet Tuesday morning, the decision was handed out, with our umbrellas pouring and our clothing sticking to our skin, like the weight of everything we'd brought with us. We silently made our way to the courtroom, which was drenched in rain. Just the two of us this time. There are no reporters peering over fences. There is nothing within except the icy chill of finality. Nothing moved in the courtroom. The judge seemed heavier, as well as if the mental and emotional strain of this case had taken its toll on everyone. Prior to speaking, he rearranged papers, fine-tuned his spectacles, and cleared his voice. "This matter has been long and difficult," he said, his voice calm and cautious. "Deeply concerned for the family involved, not only the court." In my mother's arms, I could feel her tension. Elena remained still, 3 rows behind. Judgment was forthcoming. The court cannot, in good conscience, disregard the surrounding circumstances, which include new evidence, documentation of offshore accounts, and testimony from parties involved, even though Richard A. Carter's last will and testament is valid under state law. At the time, I was unsure of its meaning. It seemed nevertheless distinct. Success followed the verdict. The original division of the estate is hereby revoked. A pulse. Here is the distribution of assets as ordered by the court. He enumerated it in detail. My mother, Margaret Carter, would get 1/4 of the estate, which includes any assets, real estate businesses, and offshore accounts that have been verified and incorporated into probate. Not just as a tribute to her marriage, but also to the 30 years of emotional and domestic work that went unbenchmarked. Breathing became difficult for her. Despite everything, she remained composed, simply lowering her head. She allowed herself to breathe out. Under Elena's supervision, a sizable amount would remain in her possession. Nearly 20% of her bequest would be held in a controlled trust, with access restricted to circumstances pertaining to openness, financial reporting, and the effect on charity. Something moved in the room. Discipline instead. However, limits. What about me? There was another throat clearing by the judge. Nathan Carter has been designated as the manager of the family trust and overseer of the estate. He is responsible for making sure that everyone gets what they deserve and following the court's distribution orders. I went completely still. He went on to say, "This role is both legal and personal. Along with emotional maturity, it demands fiduciary responsibility." I felt as if I had been sucked dry. It was not an incentive. It was a weight to bear. Quite a weight. A gracious offer. Quite a task. The judge then halted the proceedings as he was about to adjourn. Gripped his eyes. Observed us. "Your grief cannot be resolved in this courtroom," he whispered. "Misunderstanding, silence, and secrecy that have persisted for years will not be healed by this." One last paper was what he took up. "However, the court is of the belief that recovery is achievable." He displayed a letter ostensibly sent in secret by Mr. Hale. It originated with my dad. Excluded from the bequest, not affiliated with the trust. A simple message written on the ancient typewriter he kept in the garage, and with his signature and the date. "Whoever gets their hands on this," it read, "leaving a family that isn't sure of itself, is my sole regret. My life's work will be in vain if we can't mend your broken hearts." The court then imposed one further requirement: family therapy as ordered by the court. 6 sessions are required, all at once. Not a single attorney. Absence of media. There will be no justification. No one responded first. Finally, I saw a change in my mom's expression as time went on. Rather than a fight, not wrath. Simply put, exhaustion is making room for hope. On our way out, Elena finally caught my gaze after weeks of ignoring her. A grin eluded her. However, she gave a little nod for approval. It wasn't big, very little. However, in our language, which was developed prior to the use of secrets and signatures, that was crucial. The downpour has ceased outside. We left the courtroom without ducking or squirming, in fear of the sky, which was a first. As ChatGPT put it, awkwardness ensued at the outset of the therapy sessions. There were tissue boxes arranged in every corner of the beige office where we were sitting. Progress over perfection was written on a whiteboard, and while nobody wanted to be there, nobody wanted to go either. Nobody spoke at the first meeting. The second one we debated. On the third, an item broke. There was no big deal. No problems. Absent yelling admissions. For an instant, when my mom paused in the middle of a conversation and whispered, it was the silence that made me furious more than the money. I couldn't shake it. For some reason, we kept thinking the wound had anything to do with the will, the books, the bequest. However, the true anguish never sprang from figures. It dealt with the concept of being unaware. As we continued to investigate this fact further, insights emerged. Even well-intentioned secrets may lead to negative consequences, as we discovered. Not because he was unkind, but because he mistakenly believed that being silent was a sign of strength. My father kept his true feelings, anxieties, and ambitions hidden. The act of protecting us from harm constituted an expression of love. It wasn't true. Absence of openness in love breeds estrangement. Distrust develops when distance is not addressed. Trust isn't established by delivering good news. It is established by enduring difficult realities side by side. Assuming love meant understanding, and understanding meant agreement, we operated for a long time like other families. However, our foundation's fragility was brought to light as the hurricane made landfall. We faced the patterns we had never questioned in those therapy chairs. Even if everything else seemed uncertain, Mom needed control. The tendency for Elena to bear her responsibilities alone, as if she were certain that no one else could. My default mode is to take a middle ground position, expecting that harmony would resolve the issues that dialogue evaded. We even began to unlearn those positions. Inheritance and legacy are defined differently, which we also discovered. At one point, the $75 million windfall seemed like a legal enchantment. Eventually, however, it served as a tool, for the sake of purpose, not of power. We choose to make something collaborative, without feeling guilty, without regard to public relations. Regarding the matter of healing, however, in order to help underprivileged youths get a head start in the construction, architectural, and technical fields, we set up the Richard A. Carter Foundation. College was never an option for Dad. However, he used his hands to construct things. Many houses were constructed by him. Security was his creation. And some part of that complicated, reclusive guy wished that others may have that opportunity as well. We always keep in mind that my dad was trying to tell us something, even while he was silent whenever we meet a kid who received one of those scholarships. Here we assist him in completing the phrase. However, this may have been the most important takeaway. Breakups may happen to any family. The good news is that every household may decide for itself to subsist in the crevices, or to start again. We decided to start again. We aren't going to act like everything is great right now. Things may still hurt sometimes. Even on dinner times, Mom won't mention Elena by name. Some days I just can't shake the feeling that my dad is talking to me, telling me everything that happened and why he never told me. However, fresh days are also there. Days that bring us joy once again. Instead of following the instructions of a trust contract, we get into an argument over Thanksgiving dinner, in discussions centered on the future rather than the past. For a long time, I believed that a father's legacy consisted of his possessions. Finally, I understand. The key is to figure out what to do with his belongings. Money dwindles. Property deteriorates with time. The permanence of printed signatures fades with time. However, the effects of healing are long-lasting, and each time we avoid making assumptions in favor of speaking the truth, avoid being silent, and choose forgiveness over pride, his legacy lives on in our regard. Not only the guy he was, despite his imperfections, he made an effort to maintain the unity of his family. My mom, Elena, and I stood on the steps of a newly established Detroit vocational school last week. It was the first location to receive full funding from the Richard A. Carter Foundation. Reports were non-existent. There will be no grand unveiling. Our little family of 3, observing the arrival of students to a facility that my father would have been delighted to have contributed to. Mom extended her hand to take Elena's, retained it. An unspoken clasp spoke louder than any apologies could. Looking at them together, I didn't see a broken family for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. A new form emerged before me, flawed but forthright. Somewhat wounded, but getting better. On our way out, Elena wanted to know whether we could have lunch. Our little trio, as we once did. My mom beamed. I would prefer that. Not everything was fixed. Scars remain on our bodies. However, we now also provide clarity, which is stronger. Additionally, the option. The narrative started in a way that was not up to us. However, the way it progresses is entirely up to us. Perhaps that's where the true legacy resides.